for him. As you point out, it ends up being like he's just there to fulfill some comedy bits while Helen carries the movie. It's not that Helen isn't interesting enough to carry it. It's that we don't want to see an Incredibles movie without Bob.
I've never really had a favorite Incredible. It is telling about how kind of lukewarm I am. Yes, he was the star of the last movie, but if I were to think of my favorite Incredible, it was probably Dash. Mr. Incredible's kind of blah. He's just kind of there. He's the stalwart Superman, and I think I like his kids more than I like the parents.
I might go with Helen because she gets to do the most creative stuff with her power, but I think about this as a family dynamic. You don't have Bob as a single Incredibles film. You got to have the family, and that's what works for me. I want to see them all come together and work together as a team.
Yeah, agreed with that. Ultimately, the movie is about a family dynamic. To single anyone out for too long would be the wrong impulse. No one gets a spin-off in The Incredibles. They are stronger as a family unit here. And so, after this Underminer battle, the family has to go in hiding. One last time, Rick Dicker has to clean it up. Even he's being retired at this point. The guy that relocates supers is told no more of this. So the best he can do is throw him in a motel for 2 weeks and, zap the memory of poor Tony so that not only does he not remember seeing Violet wearing that Incredibles outfit, he doesn't even know who Violet is.
I kind of saw that coming. I knew the neuralizer was going to come into play. But yeah, like you said, Jacob, that 60s aesthetic, now it's a suction cup and it looks like a giant projector and things. But I can't tell, is that hotel supposed to be a nice hotel in the 60s or a really rundown no-tell motel today? Because if I see a hotel with doors facing out, instead of having hallways, I now think of that as skeevy.
Well, yeah, those were nice at one point.
Yeah, in the 60s, but now...
I think this film plays off of both those aesthetics, though. There's a bit of nostalgia, but we're also watching this from a modern point of view where, you do not want to stay at that hotel.
It's not a home. The point is their home blew up in the first film, and rather than getting a new home, they've been relegated to 2 weeks, mind you. 2 weeks.
No new jobs given to them, no more insurance.
Squat here, and then one of them has to go back to work, and Helen figures that, it's her turn. She saw how much Bob suffered at the insurance company, and that was a terrible job. You could see that he resented having to screw people out of their money. And so she is going to try and find a job, and she does. Through a little bit of happenstance, during the Underminer fight, it catches the attention of a shady character. I hesitate to call him a villain or an asset. A multimedia tycoon named Win.
And he saves Frozone, because lest you forget Frozone, Samuel L. Bleep Jackson is fighting against the Underminer as well. And when things go bad, Frozone freezes his way out of there to be picked up in a limo that Win sent. And it's Frozone who shows up at the hotel with just full of swagger. He's just like, oh yeah, I'm back, and tells them to go meet Win and to wear their old outfits because this guy's nostalgic.
Much like Brad Bird. I think that this is playing off of Brad Bird having a similar affection for old-looking retro steampunk kind of vision.
And it's always interesting seeing how their choice for the voice actor affects my perception of the character. Like, Winston is Bob Odenkirk. I'm a big fan of Better Call Saul, where he's a kind of this slimy lawyer, and that character he played in Breaking Bad. So, like, when I think Bob Odenkirk and he's showing up, hey, I want to give you a job, I'm like, uh-oh, this is the villain. And then they introduce his sister, Catherine Keener. I'm thinking, Get Out. I'm like, okay, these are the bad guys of the film.
Absolutely, Catherine Keener. When we find out that the villain of this film is into hypnosis,
yes.
All I could think about was her and her teacup and Get Out.
But easily, I know when we're introduced to Win and his sister, one of them are going to be the bad guy again. I think it's a replay of the first movie in that last time we had Syndrome, who had a female intermediary make Mr. Incredible do heroic things again, all as a plot to undermine supers. And here we've got the same plot, basically, where Win isn't the bad guy, but his sister Evelyn is, and she's working with Win again to undermine the superheroes, and all the jobs that Elastigirl's getting sent out to do is really orchestrated by the person telling her to do it.
Yeah, this is my biggest frustration with the film. 14 years you've had to write a story, and you're just going to do the first movie again, but swap the genders? Now it's Elastigirl that's going on the secret missions, who we think is hiring her. We all know that they're bad guys, or one of them is at least. It's frustrating how long it takes for that reveal to happen because I'm anticipating it right from the first.
That's exactly right. It's disappointing how many of the notes they replay. I know in sequels, certainly in a sequel where it's been a long time since audiences have seen the last one, you do want to recall what they loved about the original, but you don't want to telegraph who your villain is. And by doing it exactly the same way, we know it's both or one of these telecommunication people. We tend to think it might be the guy because, he's flashy and he's talking about perception being everything and he wants to control everyone with presenting images. And that's also what the villain does. But once we realize this is a female-centric storyline, we're looking much harder at his sister Evelyn.
And I blame Brad Bird for this. I think the man can't have a surprise. I knew who Syndrome was last time with Incrediboy. I thought that was a neon sign of obviousness. And here he does it again. It was one of my big problems with the last movie is it had no surprise. Neither does this one.
True enough. The question I have going into this is, one of the things that I think we were left debating about the original one was, what is it to be exceptional, and is it right to hide that to blend in with others? That was a theme I so desperately wanted them to carry on into this movie. And I think there's a part of this movie that would like to talk about the way the world has gone under the influence of screens. They're going to have a villain named Screenslaver, and every time someone's looking at a TV at an inopportune moment, they will be under the control of this villain. Certainly, if they wanted to tell a modern day story, I'll tell you what, I lost my cell phone while I was traveling in Europe, and you become hyper aware of how addicted people are to their cell phones and screens when you don't have one anymore. It was stunning, sometimes horrifying, to be walking in crowded public places and realize no one is looking up.
I did empathize with Screenslaver in this film. Like, she gets one monologue. It doesn't really match up with the tactics he's taking, with the monorail and all that. But I'm like, yeah, this is right. Get off the screens. I'm kind of, let Screenslaver go a bit longer. Maybe he could solve some of our issues.
Not only that, but here's a juicy idea. Don't cell phones make us equal to superheroes? Don't we not need them because any super technique that they have, we can replicate with these devices? The real villain would be someone with a cell phone. I think that would have been a way to play it. I think that there is a version of this movie that tackles that contemporary idea, but I think much of this movie backs away from that. And I feel like it goes for safe and obvious scenarios and not the things that I cared about most.
I mean, Helen and Evelyn will sit down twice to have these, and they feel really out of place. I think they're good conversations, but they don't fit in the film. But they'll sit down to talk about consumerism versus really art. And Evelyn, she just creates, and then it's up to Wynn to go and market it and sell it. And she's just the creative force. But, they have this whole debate going on the whole time about which is more important. And it just feels like, hey, Brad Bird wants to talk about art versus commerce. And it doesn't really integrate into the story at all.
And Pixar really wants to talk about pro-women after John Lasseter, the head of their whole company, has now gone underground and is, I think, being removed from the company because of his treatment of women at the company. They are having a PR problem of their own, so they want to present the image of women in power. And so this story does become maybe also just as topical, but to me, less dramatically interesting. The idea that women are oftentimes in the shadow of men and women should feel empowered to be super and not let men do that heroic work.
And yet, Elastigirl is the one chosen for the obvious reasons, and it's going to bruise Mr. Incredible's ego that he is a destructive force. He brings down buildings. Elastigirl is finesse. And yet, you've got this rich Wynn saying, I'm going to dress you this way. I'm going to put you in this suit. There's just a little Svengali going on. I'm going to give you this bike and I'm going to take you to this city. So the man controls all of Elastigirl's actions. The fact that he takes her to a different city away from her husband, I thought they might go with the opposite of what they did in the first one, where Helen thought Bob was cheating on her, that maybe Wynn was going to try to lure Elastigirl away from her husband or something.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have been interesting. Ultimately they're going to hypnotize Helen, but I always think it's more interesting when you can convince a character with logic. That if Evelyn could appeal to Helen because, hey, my brother treats me like your husband treats you, if you get that on an intellectual level, to me that's more gripping than I got magic glasses and I'm going to slap them on your face.
Speaking of more gripping, everything Elastigirl does is more interesting than anything Mr. Incredible does. I've seen Mr. Mom. I love Mr.
Yes.
Mom. You, Bob, are no Mr. Mom.
Mr. Mom works because it came in a very specific context, like of 80s, early Reagan recession, women going back to work.
Tuna prices being increased.
That as well, yes. I don't know what tuna costs these days because the economy's doing so great. I don't have to worry about that. But yeah, nowadays it just feels like, well, men do stay at home and raise the kids and women go to work. This is supposed to be funny now, the bumbling dad. And we're going to have they don't say Common Core, but we're going to have a Common Core math joke. That was funny, 8 years ago when Obama was president, I guess.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on this. This feels like an 80s comedy. And that's wrong for a movie made in 2018. We need to feel like this isn't weird. It isn't weird. There's nothing about this scenario that feels out of place with contemporary society. Men get displaced from the workplace and become stay-at-home dads all the time. I've known many, and there's no shame in it. And usually they do it without this kind of learning curve that Mr. Incredible has to go through, where he has to fail so that he can come back. And I guess maybe the character arc is he's learning to be more tidy. Is he less mean? Is he less messy now that he has learned what it is to pick up after others? If it's there, I feel like it's applied in too thin a coat.
Yeah, at the end, he's just as destructive as he is at the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, they do stop a building from coming down, but it's Frozone who does that, not Mr. Incredible. And did he never help Dash with homework before? Did he never deal with Violet before? Violet's blaming him for the fact that Tony doesn't remember her anymore. I think it's really her own fault for ripping off her mask in disgust if she's misplacing her anger. But yeah, the fact that we have the sullen, moody adolescent girl who's going to be invisible and eat her feelings by going to the refrigerator and then slamming the door to her room.
True.
And what I like, my favorite part of this movie actually, is something you probably wouldn't guess. Jack.
No, I agree. This is what works most for me, because what's been fun with these Incredibles films is they do look at real life and how would that clash up with superheroes. So yeah, you have a newborn baby and now powers are manifesting. How is that going to work when a baby's just going to shoot laser beams and it can't control that?
He reminds me of a Tom Avery creation. Like, he feels from that retro Looney Tunes era, something like a Tasmanian devil,
He turns into a devil. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there is something very fun about watching that. He is unlike any of the other characters in this family. He'll end up being classified as a polymorphous super. And I think that's true. I think in households today, people are learning that sometimes their members are autistic or have fluid sexuality, and you're learning how to incorporate that difference into the family unit. I think this stuff is good too.
My favorite Incredibles film, I can say that right now, is Jack Attack, the video short that I saw, I think it was before Finding Nemo. That's the parallel story during the Incredibles 1 of what happens to the babysitter who's babysitting Jack.
Yeah, I was thinking that because I'm like, doesn't the family know he has powers? But then I'm like, oh, I guess that was all the babysitter. They didn't see that, and he had powers when Syndrome tried to kidnap Jack. So yeah, this is the first time they're realizing it has powers. And look, this is made for real little kids, this scene, but I do love it when Jack fights that raccoon.
You know what it reminded me of? I love the scene too, but I've seen 2 Ice Age films.
I've seen 0, thankfully.
I don't really care for any of the Mastodon stuff, but you give me Scrat chasing that acorn.
Yeah.
I love Scrat, and this is the Scrat scene of this movie.
It certainly has that quality. It certainly will be the thing that when you get to these home environments that you wouldn't cut. But this movie, it felt long to me because I saw a marathon.
No, it is long. It's almost 2 hours, I think.
But yeah, I'd like to believe that even at my freshest, taking it in on a single viewing. This runs a little long, and it runs long because, again, I think Mr. Incredible is a favorite character. We don't want to reduce his size in the story, but his importance in the story is obviously much more minimal, and they spend way too much time on this. You need just a few of this Jack stuff as characters slowly realize what he can do. I'd also argue you don't need some of these supporting characters. I know we all like Samuel Jackson, but Frozone is a nothing in this movie, and so is Edna.
Well, yeah, Frozone was a nothing in the last movie either, just to show there were other heroes who's a friend. He plays that same role here. Come on, Sam Jackson probably did this